panoramas in your virtual tour by using the Panorama Editor located on the Editor menu. When you get to the Panorama Editor, you will notice that there are two areas that you can edit your panorama. There is Basic Settings and Embed Video. We're going to start with the Basic Settings. Now, in the Basic Settings window, you will see that there is a window right here where you can view the panorama that you are editing. Over to the right here, you will see three toggle buttons. The first one is for Panorama Settings, which we're currently on right now. There is another button for Image Settings. When you click on the Image Settings button, you are able to adjust the brightness, contrast, lightness, saturation, and hue of the panorama in the virtual tour. On the last button that looks like a sunshine there is the color balance. And that is where you can adjust the color balance of your panorama in case you need to edit those settings. We're going to go back to the panel settings now. And on the panel settings, you can see that we have a minimum zoom and maximum zoom. These fields here allow you to control how much zoom the customer is allowed to use when they're viewing the virtual tour. Setting the minimum zoom high and the maximum zoom low allows the person viewing the tour to have the most amount of zoom range to take the panorama as far out away from them as they can, or zoom in as close as they can on the viewer when looking at the panorama. The zoom factor slider here sets the amount of zoom that is the default view for the customer when they click to view the virtual tour. You can see that you can slide that zoom factor far in to really zoom the panorama in, giving the customer a very up-close view of the panorama. And when you set the zoom factor in really far like this, on a standard 360 panorama, that's going to allow the customer also to be able to scroll up and down a ways on the image, as it has brought that panorama very close to them. If you set the zoom factor so that the panorama is zoomed farther out, they won't have as much room to scroll up and down until they zoom in on the panorama. However, it makes it so that they can see the entire room. They can see the room from the very top to the very bottom of the panorama. Another important aspect of the panel settings is the speed of rotation. Now, the speed is based on number of seconds for the panorama to rotate from the beginning of the panorama all the way around to the end of the panorama. The important thing to keep in mind here is that the number of seconds is going to be the time for it to rotate from the beginning to the end. And obviously, if you have a partial panorama, that is going to require less seconds for it to rotate around, since it does not have as far to rotate. Now, you'll see that the default setting for the rotational pan is right here on this speed setting right here for 60 seconds. The reason we chose to work with number of seconds is the number of seconds is the only way to keep the pan rotation consistent from one computer to another, no matter if you have a slow computer or a very super fast computer. When you base it on number of seconds for rotation, all computers will rotate the pans at the same speed, and therefore it keeps it consistent from one computer to another. So that's why we chose to operate with number of seconds. Now, the panoramas currently default to a setting of 60. If you want to set a different rotational speed as your default speed, then you can do so by clicking on the settings button up here at the top of your account. And on the settings page, you will go to your preferences right here. Down at the bottom, you will see that it says panorama speed and still photo speed. There's your default panorama speed. So if you would like to change your panorama speed to a different default, that will simply just be the default that is automatically applied to all of your panoramas until you change the speed. So that is located right here on the settings tab under preferences right there at the bottom. And if you make a change, make sure that you do click update in order to save that change. Let's go back to editing our panorama now. And on the Panorama Editor, we can see that this 360-degree panorama is defaulting to 60 seconds. So for that to make one full rotation, it's going to take a minute. If we had a partial panorama, let's say we had a panorama that was only 180 degrees. half of a circle. In order to keep the pan speed of a partial pan the same as a full pan, we would want to decrease that speed by half the amount of time for a panorama that's only half of a circle. So if our full 360 panorama is going to take 60 seconds, and I'll show you what that looks like by clicking on the preview button here, you can see the speed of that panorama for it to take 1 full minute to rotate all the way around 360 degrees. If we had a partial panorama that was simply just half a circle, 180 degrees, we would want to set that speed to only 30 seconds. Since the panorama only has half the distance to travel, it requires only half the amount of time if we want that partial pan to rotate at the same speed as the full 360 pan. Now, if you had a panorama that was only 90 degrees, that is 1/4 of a panorama, so we would use 1/4 of a minute or 15 seconds to keep the speed even between the partial pans and the full 360 pan. Now, if you want to see what this looks like, for me to speed this up, I'll go ahead and just rotate the panorama back around here. So we saw the speed at 60 seconds, 1 minute for a full rotation. I'm going to go ahead and set this to 30 seconds now. That means 30 seconds to make the full rotation on this 360 pan. You have to save those settings, so I made the change to the 30 and clicked on save. And when we preview it, notice that the panorama is moving much faster, and that's because it now has half the amount of time to rotate that whole panorama around. So since we've cut the time in half, it's speeding the movement up because it's going to take only 30 seconds now for that panorama to pan all the way around. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and bring my panorama back around now. So if you want to speed the pan up, if you want to speed the rotation of your panorama up, then you need to decrease the amount of time. If you want to slow it down, then you need to increase the amount of time. The more time you give it, the slower it's going to rotate. And so just make sure that as you're changing the settings in here, remember that the higher number means it goes slower because you're giving it more time. Now if I preview this, notice that panorama is moving a lot slower. That's a little too slow for my taste. So I'm going to go ahead and set that back to the standard 60 seconds for a full 360 panorama, and I'm going to save that speed. Alright, so the next thing that we have here are two buttons, pan left and pan right. You've seen me using these just to rotate my panorama around. There's the pan left and pan right. These buttons only appear when you have a full 360 degree panorama. The reason these buttons appear on only a 360 panorama is the fact that when a full 360 panorama starts, you can set the point that the customer will see as soon as the panorama opens. Now, if I was to rotate this panorama around to here, and if I was to leave it right here at this view, then when the panorama opens, the first thing that the customer is going to see is the front desk of the lobby here. I could change and rotate this around to this view angle here, and this is what the customer would see when they're viewing the virtual tour and this panorama loads for viewing. I want them to be able to see the front desk first. So let me go ahead and I'm going to rotate this around here real quick, and then let's go ahead and save that setting. So we're going to save the fact that this is the view angle we want the customer to see first when they're viewing the virtual tour, and let's go ahead and see what that looks like in the virtual tour. Okay, we can see the virtual tour is up here, and here comes our lobby. That's a lobby still right there, and here's the lobby panorama. I'll click on that, and notice that the lobby started right here facing in the direction of the front desk, just as we had indicated in the Panorama Editor. So when I had rotated that panorama around, and I'll just back this up here, when I had rotated that panorama around, I had set it so that the front desk was centered, and that would be the first thing the customer sees when the panorama loads. So it's always important to make sure that you set the panorama to start at the point that you want what point you want the customer to see first when you are in the Panorama Editor. Let's go ahead and load another panorama for editing here. I'm going to load this pool pan, and you can see that this pool panorama currently is showing the pool. Now we can take a quick look around by panning to the right, and we can see that this particular panorama of the pool area here, obviously we would want to have the customers see the pool area first when this panorama opens up. We don't want them to be looking at the corner of the hotel back here where you see the doorway and you see this little area to sit next to the pool. What we want the customer to see first on this panorama is the pool. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this pan around here, and I'm going to leave the pool just slightly off center. I could center the pool perfectly right here in the middle, but instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to offset this pool just a little bit here, show more of the chairs, and I'm going to save this setting, and I'll show you why. When we go back to view the virtual tour here, you will see that when I come down here to locate the pool panel, alright, and there's the pool panel right there. When we load this pool panel, it takes a second for it to start. By the time that comes on the screen and the customer has a chance to look at that, notice that the pool is coming into view. I'm going to pause that for a second and back this up. So this is where it's starting. You can see that the pool is not perfectly centered in the view. It's just off to the right. I'm going to go back to this photo and show you the pool panorama loading again. As I click on the pool panel, notice it just comes up and the pool is really coming into the centered view at the point that you have a chance to really recognize what the scene is that you're looking at. So often when I am setting my angle of view, I will make sure that the panorama is facing in a direction when it starts, so that as it loads, a customer will be able to easily identify and see exactly what I want them to see. This pool is just coming into view as they are able to focus and look at this particular panorama to see that it's the pool area. Then of course the panorama will rotate around the rest of the way to show the rest of the parts of the pool area. But what I wanted them to see first was the pool, and as that pool panorama loads right here, I have the opening view set so that it starts just centered to the left of the pool, and then that way as that pool loads and rotates, they will be just coming into the full view of the pool area. So that's another thing to keep in mind as you are setting the starting point of your 360 panoramas. So now we know how to edit the basic panel settings for a 360 panorama. Let's go ahead and take a look at a partial panorama. You can come down here and click on these green arrows pointing up, which is the load image option. And you'll notice here that I have a partial panorama loaded. Alright, now in the partial panorama panel settings, again we still have the minimum and maximum zoom factor, and speed. And I had preset this one for 30 degrees or 30 seconds for the rotation, because this panorama is a 180. So it's not a full 360 degree panorama. This is a partial panorama, and it was shot with 6 photos. Again, we take 1 photo every 30 degrees on the RTV rotator. So when we are shooting our pans, it's easy to remember that for each photo in the pan that you shoot, that covers 30 degrees of view. We take 1 photo for every 30 degrees. So since this panorama was shot with 6 photos, I know it's a 180 degree panorama. So I'm going to go ahead and notice my field of view is set right now to 80 degrees. If I was to preview the move of this panorama right now, notice that it is panning across, but notice that my panorama here, my partial panorama, has a weird curve to it. It's not displaying correctly. There is a curvature to the countertops, they're not straight, and there is a curvature to the crown molding here. It does not look correct. And the reason that is this is a 180 degree panorama, but this horizontal field of view is indicating only 80 degrees. So we need to go ahead and we need to make an edit to this. I'm going to go ahead and make this now a 180 degree panorama. So my horizontal field of view is 30 degrees for every shot. Total of 6 shots is 180 degrees. I'm going to go make that 180 degrees and click Save. And you'll notice now that when I set that field of view to 180 degrees and I click Save, that it's going to correct my panorama and make it display correctly. Now you'll notice that the edges of the countertop and the crown molding at the top all look nice and straight. And when I go ahead and preview this panorama, you'll see that as the image rotates around, the partial panorama here is displaying correctly. So by changing the field of view to the appropriate field of view for this partial panorama, it is now cause this panorama to display correctly. And you can see that all the countertops are now nice and straight, the crown molding is nice and straight, and everything looks great. So that's how you edit a partial panorama. Again, the difference is there's no pan left and right because we don't have to set a start point. A partial panorama is always going to want to begin at the beginning of the partial panorama. Otherwise, if you were to start it partway through the panorama, you'd miss the beginning portion. So there's no reason to have the buttons to set the start point of a partial panorama, since a partial panorama always needs to begin at the beginning of the panorama and then rotate to the end. However, the field of view is always going to be an available option for partial panoramas and not 360s. A 360 is 360, so there's nothing to set on a 360. If you see this HFOV, this horizontal field of view, when you are editing a 360 panorama, that means that your 360 panorama is not set as a 360 cylindrical panorama, that instead it's set as a partial pan, and you will want to go to your panorama still photo and video manager and make sure to set that panorama as a 360 degree panorama, so that you will be able to edit that accordingly. So if you have a panorama that shows the HFOV and it's supposed to be a 360, you have not set it to a 360, you have set it to a partial, and you will need to go to the manager and change that back to a 360 cylinder panorama. So you'll get the pan left and right buttons only for setting the opening view of a panorama, the start point of the panorama. You'll get these pan left and right buttons, and after you make all of your adjustments, click save on a full 360. For a partial panorama, you won't get the pan left and right because it always is going to start at the beginning of a partial pan, and what you will find instead is the horizontal field of view to make sure that you set the degrees according to the panorama that you have photographed. Again, if you've taken 3 photos, remember the RTV rotator takes 1 photo every 30 degrees, so 3 photos would be 90 degrees. You would want to set that pan to 90. In this case, I had taken 6 shots, so 6 times 30 degrees is 180 degrees. It's half a pan, and so I have set mine to half of a 360, which is 180. And again, anytime you make any changes here, you'll always want to click the save button at the bottom. The button up here to go to the image settings is pretty self-explanatory. You can adjust to increase or decrease the brightness, increase or decrease the contrast, increase or decrease the lightness, saturation, and hue of a panorama. And you can apply those settings right here. If you ever need to reset it back to the default, you can use the reset option right there. Same thing goes for the color balance as well. You can make adjustments to go more towards the red or more towards cyan, more towards green or more towards magenta, more towards blue or more towards yellow, and apply those changes. If you ever need to reset that panorama back to 0, you can always use the reset option right here. Those are all pretty self-explanatory. The next exciting thing as far as the panoramas go is the embed video option right here. So we're going to go ahead and go to the embed video editor right now, and in the embed video editor, this is where you're able to actually embed video into your panorama to make your panoramas come alive. So let's go ahead and locate a panorama of a room here real quick. Let's see here. Let's take a look at this King Suite room right here. And let's see if there's a TV in it. Okay, there is a TV right there. Okay, there's one TV right there. Let's check another room here real quick. Let's check the Queen room. Alright, we're going to come around. Okay, great. There's the Queen room, and as you can see, I have already embedded a video right here. I'm going to go ahead and remove that real quick, and then we'll start from scratch. Now, you'll see that I've got my panorama, and again, to rotate in the embed video window, you merely just left mouse click for PCs and drag your mouse in the direction that you want to rotate the pan. If you're on a Mac, just use your standard mouse click and drag, and that will rotate this panorama around for you. So what you want to do is locate the area where you want to place your video. So I'm going to go ahead and put the TV right here in the center of the panorama, and the video, in order to add video and embed it in your panorama, the video must be uploaded into your virtual tour as a media file. Now, if you've not added any video clips into your virtual tour, you can do that simply by going to the uploader for videos and upload a video into the virtual tour. Once you have video loaded into your virtual tour, you can add those video clips simply by clicking on the green plus button, which is the add button for that video clip, to add it as an embedded video clip in your Panorama. Now you can see here it's playing my video clip for me right now, and I don't want it to play it only one time. I want it to play continuously. So I'm going to go ahead and set that video clip to loop. Alright, so there I have that set to now constantly loop. The next thing I need to do is get this video to line up with this television. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come right up here and I'm going to use this distort feature, and notice that it has adjusted my video clip. Now it's awfully small and I need to make that video clip match the size of the television, so I'm going to use the spot width and the spot height to increase the size of that video clip to help it match up with the size of the television that you've got right here in the room. So after I've used the distort factor to allow that clip to align the straight edges of the clip with the edges of the TV, there you can see the line of the clip with the line of the TV, and I've adjusted the size so it fits the TV window better. I'm going to go ahead and I am going to go ahead and preview the tour now with this video clip added. So let's go ahead and take a look at the tour and see how this video looks. Okay, I've got my tour up here. I'm going to locate my queen room here real quick. And let's see here, there's some still photos. Let's go to the panorama real quick. And there's my queen room panorama. And as that comes up, I'm going to rotate that around right here. And we will see the video of the squirrel right there. Notice the squirrel moving around on the TV. Isn't that pretty cool? So there we go. We've got that video embedded right into the panorama. And notice that as I move the panorama, the video still continues to play. So that'll really make your panoramas come alive. That's pretty exciting for the fact that as you are looking at a panorama, that you can pause it and stop it at any point, yet that video continues to play wherever you place it. Now there's a lot of great uses for doing this embedded video. Imagine making the TVs in the home or the business that you have photographed come alive by having actual video playing on the screens there. Imagine doing a virtual tour of a room that has an aquarium and then going back and videoing that aquarium so that you can take and embed the video of the fish on the aquarium in the panorama to make that aquarium come alive. That as they are looking at the virtual tour panorama and they are zooming in and zooming out, that video is playing and they're seeing the fish swimming around in the aquarium. There's just a lot of neat applications that you can use for this embed video option. So experiment with it, play around with it, and see what kind of cool creations you can come up with as well. But that's simply how you do the embedding video option. So we've gone through the basic settings for the panorama and the embed video, and that is the Panorama Editor.